Freedom 7. He'd done it. At age 37, the first American in space. President Kennedy pinned a medal on him. 500,000 cheered as he paraded down Pennsylvania Avenue. And within 3 weeks, Kennedy launched the Apollo program.
Achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Shepard would himself reach the moon in 1971 and brought us this wonderful moment.
Two hands, but I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here. Miles and miles and miles.
The world has now lost Alan Shepard, but we still have the capsule he first rode to space that day, the Freedom 7. The Smithsonian took it out of storage today, brought it here to its Air and Space Museum in Washington to put on public display. Small, primitive by today's high-tech space standards. But the 5 minutes Shepard spent aboard it in space restored our national sense of confidence. Later, Shepard invested in business, became a millionaire.
And when he played hard. He had a lot of fun. He was a big practical joker. But when he was on the job, business was first. And he took care of business.
Just 5 months ago, now 74 years old, he spoke of the thrill of looking back at Earth from space.
That was an overwhelming feeling, and seeing the beauty of the planet on the one hand, but the fragility of it on the other.
Today, a grateful nation looks back.
Alan Shepard truly had the right stuff.
The U.S. now leads the world in space. It all started with that first flight. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
Columbia, Houston, for Kevin. Would like you to go.
Later here on NBC Nightly News, we'll have the rest of the original astronauts. What happened to them? The sense of excitement that accompanied those first space flights, of course, long has diminished for the general public, but the daring, the risks, the technical marvel of the space program, all of that still goes on. And tonight, NBC's Andrea Mitchell has the latest training for the next big step, a space station.
It's literally light years from Alan Shepard. Imagine being dropped into outer space in a 250-pound, $10 million suit. How to simulate that on Earth? Underwater. 6.2 million gallons of water, to be exact. It's happening in NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory in Houston, otherwise known as the Tank. 100 feet wide, 45 deep, the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools, training to build the world's first international space station. A $100 billion project the size of 2 jumbo jets.
It's going to be bigger than a football field. It's so big, young children will look up at the night sky and they'll say, I see it.
To build it, astronauts must practice bolting 100 separate prefabricated parts in the closest they can get on Earth to zero gravity.
They you put weights on so you're neutrally buoyant, and then you have to work with the wrenches and the equipment and assembling different parts, which gives you a simulation to some degree of what you'll run into in space.
Separate sections of the station, all shuttled to space on Russian, European, and American rockets.
It will be about as wide across as the U.S. Capitol. There are some more than 40 separate flights involved in bringing up components.
4 decades after the Russians blasted into space at the height of the Cold War, the U.S. is now leading 16 nations in the world's most complex technical experiment in international cooperation. Critics still predict that costs will also end up in outer space. But NASA predicts enormous benefits here on Earth.
We're going to study sleep disorder and osteoporosis. We're going to do studies to complement the cancer work being done on the ground. It's going to help change the future of this country and the world in the 21st century.
The first big step, NASA says, to making space travel available to everyone, following in the footsteps of Alan Shepard and his fellow astronauts. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
Of course, Alan Shepard was part of a very select group. In depth tonight, 7 men chosen to lead America into the space age.
They were test pilots to begin with, and they're therefore used to living on the edge, taking chances, taking risks.
The surviving members of Mercury 7, where are they now? And later, we thought the heat was bad. Well, now a plague of insects is part of a bumper crop of summertime critters.
Did you know mosquitoes are attracted to moisture, body heat, and movement? Did you know you can catch poison ivy if unwashed clothing is worn a year after contact? And did you know cortisone 10 penetrates skin to stop the itch and help heal poison ivy and insect bites? Among these, it's the only one with the medicine doctors recommend most to stop itching and help heal. So this summer when you itch, remember the power of 10. Cortisone 10. Powerful itch relief for the power to heal.
With Days Inn hotels in over 1,800 cities and towns, you can go as far as you want. We'll always be right down the lane. Days Inn. There you go.
Hey, Parquet. What's the word?
Better.
Better? Aren't you supposed to say butter?
Better.
Butter.
Better.
Look at how you melt. Just like butter. Mmm. You really do taste better.
Butter.
New Parquet. Now the flavor says
butter.
Even better.
Come see the newest generation of computers with more memory, more speed, more power, more graphics, more of everything at Circuit City's Computer Expo 98. For limited time only, get $10 to $100 rebates on the latest technology, like this Hewlett-Packard system with a 300 megahertz Celeron processor, monitor, and color printer, just $1199.99 after price break and rebates. Our experts can answer all your questions, and everything at Circuit City comes with a guaranteed low price. Don't miss Circuit City's Computer Expo 98.
First there was Dolly the sheep, and now scientists have cloned mice, and this could be a giant step forward in the brave new world of scientific research. But with the breakthrough comes the inevitable question: how much longer before the first human clone? NBC's Robert Bazell tonight.
The announcement today that scientists have cloned mice, creating dozens of exact copies of adult animals in the laboratory, is a major scientific achievement and a step closer to the possibility of cloning humans.
I think that this raises optimism that many species could be cloned.
To clone the mice, scientists at the University of Hawaii used a technique slightly different from the one used to make Dolly the sheep. They removed the genetic material from mouse eggs and replaced it with the genetic material from the cells of an adult animal. The result? Exact copies with no mother or father. Cloning should have all sorts of practical applications, using animals to produce drugs for humans, creating better livestock, new methods for studying disease, and perhaps even new organs for transplant. Inevitably, the new research raises the question, are we closer to cloning people? The scientific answer is yes. As more species get cloned, it is easier to think about how to do it in humans. After Dolly the sheep was produced, there were many questions about human cloning. In fact, there were questions whether Dolly herself was really a clone. But today's results put the questions about Dolly to rest.
I don't think there's going to be much in the way of questions about whether Dolly is real anymore.
Still, big problems remain before humans can be cloned. In the mouse experiments, as few as 1 in 80 of the attempts at cloning worked, and often the animals died late in development.
I don't think it is yet medically ethical to clone humans, leaving aside the philosophical issues. And for these reasons, I think it's very difficult to extend cloning to humans.
Difficult for now, but as the science advances, it could become increasingly possible. Robert Bazell, NBC News, New York.
In the financial markets, more words of caution from Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan on the soaring stock market, plus a couple of disappointing earnings reports. That was enough to push Wall Street down for a second day in a row. From CNBC tonight, the Dow Jones Industrial dropped more than 61 points. Very heavy trading today. NASDAQ was also down more than 9 points today. The widely held stocks were mixed on this day. When we come back, NBC News in depth tonight, the Mercury 7 will tell you what these American heroes did with their lives after they returned from space.
Here we are in this simple, majestic setting. None of the usual interruptions, nobody around to distract us from introducing AT&T One Rate Plus. Now, the key point, the thing to remember, is that every call you make from home with One Rate Plus, every call, day and night, 10 cents a minute.
Did you say 10 cents a minute, dude?
How do they find me?
AT&T One Rate Plus, 10 cents a minute, anytime. Call 1-800-4-1-RATE to enroll.
Gee, that oatmeal was little.
Yeah.
You done with those sausages?
Help us out.
You done with them hash browns?
Sure.
You need some help with that bacon? How'd I get heartburn? All I had was oatmeal. Got any my lantern?
Are you kidding? Aluminum and magnesium? You want Tums. Tums has calcium.
Tums calcium knocks out heartburn fast, then goes to your bones to help keep them stronger, longer.
How about a bag of donuts for the road?
How about a bottle of Tums?
What's flowing in some tap water may make it taste bad. More importantly, it may be harmful. Fortunately, there's one pitcher that reduces both chemicals and microorganisms. The new Pure Plus pitcher. Its unique double filter removes microorganisms Brita can't. So you're left with cleaner, healthier, delicious water. Get more out of your water. Get new Pure Plus.
Every night on television, there's drama. But on Dateline, the drama's real. Unforgettable stories night after night. America's most watched news magazine. Dateline, now on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. Dateline Summertime, all new on NBC.
NBC News in Depth tonight, the first man who took America on that important ride into outer space, the Mercury 7. Some 39 years ago, they were handpicked from an original pool of 508 military men. In addition to skill and stamina, one of the main criteria, they could be no taller than 5 feet 11. The original capsule was just 6 feet 10 inches high. They became instant heroes, brave, highly competitive, destined to make history. Tonight, in depth, NBC's George Lewis on where they are now.
They were the guys with the right stuff, the 7 men chosen in 1959 to lead America into space. And they rapidly became larger than life, American icons. Heroes later embraced by Hollywood.
Soon one American astronaut will climb atop that rocket, what may be the greatest death-defying stunt ever broadcast.
They were test pilots to begin with, and they're therefore used to living on the edge, taking chances, taking risks, and yet you had to have people like that who would dare climb aboard one of these rockets.
The competition to be the first astronaut to lift off was intense. Alan Shepard was once quoted as saying, "We were not buddies." When the astronauts were asked to vote on who should go first, each man voted for himself. Their friendship would come later as they took their place in history. Now, with the death of Alan Shepard, only 4 of the 7 remain, 4 American originals who still help promote the space program. Of those who passed away, Virgil Gus Grissom, a veteran of the Mercury and Gemini programs, was first. He died in 1967 when the Apollo 1 spacecraft burned on the launch pad. Donald K. Deke Slayton flew on the joint U.S.-Soviet Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975. He died of cancer in 1993. Of those who survived, John Glenn, the first astronaut who actually orbited Earth, went on to become a U.S. Senator from Ohio. Now, at age 77, he's preparing to go back into space aboard the shuttle later this year. And today he said that Alan Shepard had planned to be there to watch him take off.
The last time I talked to Al, I thought he might well make it to the end of the year at least.
Scott Carpenter flew on Mercury 7, later retired as a Navy commander. He now divides his time between Vail, Colorado and New York City. Wally Schirra flew in the Mercury and Gemini programs and retired with the rank of Navy captain. He lives in California, as does retired astronaut Gordon Cooper, also a veteran of the Mercury and Gemini programs. Cooper today reflected on the legacy of the Mercury 7.
We were lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time to be the first to really get the whole space program in America started.
7 American pioneers, 7 men larger than life, but, as we were reminded today, mortal after all. George Lewis, NBC News, Los Angeles.
One more note on Alan Shepard's historic first flight. Documents released by the National Archives today show President Kennedy wasn't so sure that he wanted that first flight into space televised. According to his secretary's diary, the president was worried about how Americans would react if something went wrong, but of course it did not. Still ahead tonight, relentless hot weather bugging America in more ways than one. And up next, the new profile of what could be this country's most dangerous terrorist threat, the angry loner.
Sure, I'd like to be financially prepared for whatever might be coming down the road, but I'd also like to be prepared to build a house someday, right here.
Since we
do with George Wallace right now, or, you know, the Civil War. I think we look back in history and certain people said this is the way it always was, it always will be, and we look back and things do change, and I think it will change. I think we will win. I just want to respond on the personal level when we're talking about this. This is not just a public policy discussion, and this is why we get so upset. This is very personal. We are being personally insulted. Gary Bauer said that a litmus test for him, for George W. Bush, is will he allow gays to be in the GOP? We had a rally down in Texas at the Texas GOP. We were called queers, faggots, sodomites, God hates you, I hate you. This is really serious. These words have consequences beyond the public policy debate in Washington.
Congressman, what's your reaction to that? That this is more than just politics? And just respond to what Mr. Tappel just said.
Well, I think again, as I said earlier, it is very hard to get to the facts and to the figures and to debate this in a non-emotional setting. I mean, even in our conversation today, people have been offended and said, you know, I've been disingenuous, been accused of being disingenuous. It's hard to keep it on a level debate structure. And I think if we could do that, and believe me, I don't condone the types of things that Mr. Toffel said took place in Houston, Texas. That's not right. I mean, this should not be a political issue that we bash people with. That's not right. It's clearly wrong. Right. But what I would say is that when you get to the facts that that this homosexual sex between men is an unhealthy lifestyle, totally unhealthy lifestyle, and that it's unnatural. When you start talking about things like that, and we could have a good debate, and I hope we do, but I do believe that it's an issue, much like abortion, that I don't think that there's a middle ground.
All right, thank you. We have to leave it there. Okay. Finally tonight, remembering astronaut Alan Shepard. Kwame Holman begins.
In 1959, Alan Shepard and 6 other men were chosen from a pool of 110 pilots who volunteered to go into space. NASA picked Shepard to guide its very first manned spaceflight.
All right, liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir.
On May 5th, 1961, Shepard became the first American in space. He flew for 15 minutes aboard the Mercury Freedom 7 spacecraft and splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean. In an interview years later, the former Navy test pilot explained his desire to be an astronaut.
I think all of those who volunteered, and certainly all of those who ended up in the finals like I did, really sort of looked at it as an extension of what they were doing. You see, as a test pilot, you sort of keep flying bigger and better and faster and farther and higher, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, you're expanding, as we call it, the boundary of the envelope being the curve describing where thou shalt not pass if you're flying an airplane. And I think all of the original 7 looked at it that way. It's not a brand new frontier, really. It's just taking what we have and pushing it out. And I think all of us looked at it as a natural extension of what we've been doing, flying strange-looking airplanes and that sort of thing.
10 years after his Mercury flight, Shepard walked on the moon, the 5th astronaut to do so.
You're right. Cameras on the surface.
As commander of that Apollo 14 mission, Shepard brought along a 6-iron and became the first and so far only golfer on the moon.
Hey, one more. Miles and miles and miles. Very good, Dal.
37 years ago, astronaut and Senator John Glenn was Alan Shepard's backup on the original Mercury flight.
No one was more dedicated to this country and to the astronaut program, to flying, to the Navy, to being a dedicated patriot in this country. No one is going to exceed Al Shepard in that regard.
President Clinton also remembered Alan Shepard today.
I can't help noting that there on the moon he lived every golfer's dream, taking his 6-iron and hitting the ball, in his words, for miles and miles. Alan Shepard truly had the right stuff. His service will always loom large in America's history.
Alan Shepard died of leukemia last night at age 74.
And to essayist Roger Rosenblatt. Roger, Alan Shepard, why is he an important man to all of us?
2 things, the geopolitical importance and the human importance, Jim. The geopolitical importance we remember because he represented America rising from its humiliation by the Soviet Union when they had successes with Sputnik and again successes with Gagarin in space, the cosmonaut who flew in space. We tried to send up a satellite, and it just fizzled on the launch pad, and the press was ruthless about it. Instead of calling it Sputnik, called it Kaputnik. And then Alan Shepard got in his rocket ship and took Americans back where they were supposed to be, where we believed we were supposed to be through invention and technology at the top of the heap. And then there was the human aspect of it, that a person did it, that it was a person. We talk about conquests of various things. Lindbergh flies the ocean, or Columbus sails the ocean, or we conquer space, but it's not the abstractions we're interested in as much as, I think, a person doing it.
Yeah.
Someone with whom we can identify, someone superior, more courageous, more technically adroit, but in the end, a person representing us who does something marvelous.
And Alan Shepard, as the president said today, he kind of exemplified Tom Wolfe's phrase, the right stuff, did he not?
He did. He was, I mean, it was wonderful. Imagine the great sense of grace and humor playing golf on the moon. But it wasn't just that. The right stuff had a moral element, too. He looked back from, when he was on the moon, he looked back and he saw our planet, and he was brought to weeping, he said, because of its fragility. What he meant was that there were so many wars going on at the planet at the time, and we were so careless with what we had, but from the perspective of the moon, he knew that he saw a treasure.
Yeah. Roger, you brought something that Tom Wolfe wrote in his book, The Right Stuff, about Alan Shepard. Set it up and then read it for us.
This is good. Here's Tom Wolfe as he's sort of imagining Shepard taking off and the thrill of getting a go. Now he could feel his heart pounding. The most critical part of the flight, next to the launch itself, was only a moment away. The separation of the capsule from the rocket. He heard a muffled explosion from above, and the escape rocket blew off, and the capsule was now free of the rocket. The force of the rocket pulling away accelerated his speed, and he felt as if he had had a kick from below. A 3-inch long rectangular light lit up green on the instrument panel. On it were the letters Jet Tower, Jettison Tower. With the tower gone, the periscope would start operating, and he could look out. But he had his eyes pinned on the green light. It was beautiful.
Oh, the right stuff. Roger Rosenblatt, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, the major stories of this Wednesday. A heat wave covered much of the United States from the southwest.
News makes the front pages. You see, our very long-time friend and colleague Ken Kashiwahara has decided that there are other things in life, and he is moving on. He was a correspondent in Vietnam during the war. He covered all of Asia. As our Hong Kong bureau chief, he's covered large chunks of America for several years from his base in San Francisco. To say that we wish him well is an understatement. That is our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Tomorrow, it may be the most dangerous place.
I've lost a friend, and the country's lost a great patriot.
The first American in space makes one last trip to the heavens. A look back at the life and legacy of Alan Shepard.
He was the father who always knew best, and the doctor who really gave a damn. Robert Young won our hearts both on and off the screen. Now friends, family, and fans say goodbye.
Murder, She Wrote. Could a book hold the key to JonBenet Ramsey's killing? Her mom was reading it just days before she died. We'll tell you why cops are trying to read between the lines.
Baby, it's hot outside. The hottest summer since we've been keeping track. Must be global warming, right? Not so fast. We'll hear from both sides on this burning issue.
And here we go again.
I'm playing to win.
Powerball fever has lots of aspiring millionaires in a frenzy. That and more right now on the Fox Reports.
Hello, everyone. I'm Todd Kahn.
And I'm Jane Skinner. John and Catherine are on assignment tonight. President Clinton says Alan Shepard definitely had the right stuff, and most Americans would probably agree.
He was the first American in space, and when he made it to the moon, he didn't just take a walk, he took a whack and a golf ball. Shepard died last night in California, but he left behind memories that will last a lifetime. Here's Kathy Wolf.
All right, lift off and the clock is started.
Freedom 7. It was only a 15-minute flight. Just 5 of those minutes were in space.
This is Freedom 7. The fuel is go.
But for the United States, it was a crucial 5 minutes, pioneering NASA's manned space program and forever making Alan Shepard an American hero.
I am very mindful at this moment of the honor which has been bestowed upon me.
We were invited back to Washington after the mission, and I got a nice little medal from the president. Just 3 weeks after that mission, 15 minutes of space, is when Kennedy made his announcement. Folks, we are going to the moon, and we're going to do it within this decade.
I worked very, very closely with him for a number of years in the program. No one was more dedicated to this country and to the astronaut program, to flying, to the Navy, to being a dedicated patriot in this country. No one is going to exceed Al Shepard in that regard.
Many Americans remember Shepard for his trip to the moon on Apollo 14 a decade later.
Try an old sand trap shot here.
Hit of a 6-iron and hit his golf ball with one hand, and I took a staff from the solar wind experiment and used that as a javelin, so we had the first Lunar Olympics.
But for Alan Shepard, the most memorable moment on the moon was seeing a large, bright planet Earth against a black sky.
It makes it look beautiful. It makes it look lonely. It makes it look fragile. You think to yourself, just imagine the millions of people that are living on that planet and don't realize how fragile it is. That was an overwhelming feeling, and seeing the beauty of the planet on the one hand, but the fragility of it on the other.
Alan Shepard was 74 years old. Kathy Wolf, Fox News.
And America's also mourning a different kind of hero today, actor Robert Young. He died of heart trouble at his home in California at the age of 91. From growing pains to medical pains, Young tackled it all on 2 of the most popular TV shows of our time. But behind the scenes, his life was anything but picture perfect. William LaJeunesse takes a look back.
Margaret, I'm home. First he was the dad, then the doctor millions of Americans wished for.
I'm sorry to see him miss. I wish we had more shows that he portrayed on TV today.
With a warm smile and reassuring voice, actor Robert Young charmed TV audiences beginning in 1954 as the thoughtful and responsible dad on Father Knows Best.
But there's a fine line between humor and ridicule. This statue is a symbol. It represents dignity, learning, and culture.
A wholesome family sitcom set in a typical Midwestern town. Young played an insurance agent who came home each night to a loving family.
People respect you. They're always glad to see you.
It just takes a little time to earn your place in the world, son. You're young yet.
Young died Tuesday just outside Los Angeles. Actor Billy Gray played Young's son.
I think he set the standard for TV dad.
Young's TV wife, actress Jane Wyatt, released this statement. Quote, "Bob was a wonderful actor to work with and one of the most conscientious people I have ever known. He was simply one of the very finest people to grace our industry."
1, 2.
In Los Angeles, people gathered near Young's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
We all remember those shows when we were kids.
Right.
They were clean.
In a second hit, Young played Marcus Welby, MD, a thoughtful, compassionate doctor. Young was also in almost 100 movies. But behind the warm smile, Young fought a lifelong battle with depression and alcoholism. Survived by 4 daughters, one said, quote, "The world has lost one of its last real leading men, and I have lost my father." In Los Angeles, William LaJeunesse, Fox News.
And up next, Ken Starr's getting a taste of his own medicine, and why we're...
Have a great night.
Right Stuff, and more. America's first man in space dies at 74. The Pentagon attacks an enemy within, trying to get the bug out before the year 2000. Medicine finds a pathway to treatment for Alzheimer's. And Americans fight back against neglect in nursing homes.
This is the CBS Evening News. With Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. One of this country's heroes has died. Alan Shepard, the first American in space and a member of the most exclusive club on Earth. One of only 12 human beings to walk on the moon. Shepard, who had leukemia, died overnight at home in Monterey, California. He was 74. CBS's Jerry Bowen remembers a pioneer, a brave heart of the final frontier.
Alan Shepard was one of America's original 7, those first astronauts handpicked for the race to outer space against that evil empire on Earth, America's Cold War enemy, the Soviet Union.
We didn't do it to be heroes. We did it because we knew we could do it.
But even before they got anywhere close to a launch pad, Shepard and company were revered as heroes as they trained and tested to go into the vast unknown.
Resume the count.
And on a tension-filled morning in May of 1961, after weather and equipment delays, former Navy test pilot Shepard, stuffed in a Mercury capsule, became the first American to fly in space.
Lift off and the clock is started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
It was Shepard and America's pride that blasted off together on that brief 16-minute flight. The Russians had been first 23 days earlier, but Shepard always maintained America's mission was best.
I actually flew the spacecraft just like a pilot flies an airplane. Obviously, the Soviets were flying as well, but they were just literally passengers. So that showed us, even early in the game, that technologically we could be comforted in the fact that we were ahead.
Senator John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth, was Shepard's backup pilot that day.
Al's the one started the whole thing out, and he's going to be very sorely missed.
10 years later, Shepard's second and last flight took him to the moon as commander of Apollo 14. He was one of just a dozen people to walk on the lunar surface.
I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here.
And the only lunar golfer in a gravity-defying display that some critics thought trivialized the mission. Shepard conceded it was frivolous, but harmless. In Washington today, his old Mercury capsule was put back on display, a tribute to the former astronaut who went on to become a successful businessman in California, but never lost his interest in space or forgot the joy of being there. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Well, they can put a man on the moon, but so far, no one's been able to solve the so-called Y2.
I was waiting when he left the Biograph Theater in Chicago. They shot to kill, and John Dillinger died July 22nd, 1934, 64 years ago today. That's Eyewitness News for tonight. Peter Jennings is next with World News Tonight. For all of us at Eyewitness News, I'm Bill Butel. For Scott and for Sam and everybody at Eyewitness News, we'll be back tonight at 11. Hope you are too. Till then, good luck, be well, have a good evening.
On World News Tonight this Wednesday, the American pioneer, the first American in space, the astronaut Alan Shepard, has died. The television father who appeared to have all the answers, the actor Robert Young, has also died. This time it's a mouse which has been cloned, and a mouse is much more like a human. What next? And in all of the heat, how does a power station stay on top of things when the system is stretched to the limit? We'll take a closer look.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. It's unusual to start the broadcast with a couple of death notices, but we begin tonight with two individuals very much associated with American ideals and ambitions in very different ways. The astronaut Alan Shepard and the longtime television actor Robert Young each had an effect on the country that neither of them ever imagined. In the case of Robert Young, it was the television character he played who became something of a national role model. Alan Shepard will always be the first American in space. First, the one who made history. Here's ABC's Aaron Brown.
In the early morning of May the 5th, 1961, Alan Shepard in a silvery spacesuit took his seat in the tiny and virtually untried Mercury space capsule and wrote his page of American history. It didn't last long. From liftoff to splashdown, just 15 minutes. It didn't accomplish nearly what the Soviets had achieved 23 days before, when they put a man in orbit.
All right, liftoff and the clock is started.
But Alan Shepard's flight on the Freedom 7, what he called just a baby step, put an American in space and the country in the space race.
Now we know that Russia need not and will not have any monopoly on manned space flight. Today will be remembered as the beginning, the day the United States first tasted space.
From that point on, 3 weeks later, and all we had was 15 minutes of space flight experience, is when President Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon.
Grounded by ear problems, Shepard almost didn't make it. But after the near disaster of Apollo 13, it was Alan Shepard who took Apollo 14 to the moon, keeping the program alive.
We're on the surface. Okay, we made a good landing.
He memorably hit the longest golf shot ever recorded and saw the world in those Cold War days in a way he would never forget.
That was an overwhelming feeling, and seeing the beauty of the planet on the one hand, but the fragility of it on the other.
Back when they were young, Alan Shepard and John Glenn were competitors. Shepard beat Glenn out for the right to make that first flight.
With the passing of Al Shepard, our nation has lost an outstanding patriot, one of its finest pilots, and I lost a very close friend.
In recent years, Shepard, who had become a millionaire businessman, suffered from leukemia, and that's what caused his death last night. But nearly 40 years ago, when he was young and strong and brave, he paved the way for one of the extraordinary achievements of this century, man's walk on the moon. Aaron Brown, ABC News, New York.
What an era it was. Alan Shepard is the third of the original 7 Mercury astronauts to die. Gus Grissom was killed when his capsule burst into fire on the launch pad in 1967. Deke Slayton died of cancer in 1993. And now the actor Robert Young. As we said, it was the characters he played on television that so many people in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s found so inspiring. For millions of people, father did know best. Young died of natural causes at his home in California last night. He was 91. ABC's Judy Muller reports from Los Angeles.
Robert Young. He was the ideal father of the 50s. Jim Anderson, an all-knowing dad who rarely mentioned his work as an insurance salesman because he was so busy nurturing what would later be known as family values.
In Father Knows Best.
Like the time son Bud gave his allowance to charity and wanted some credit for it.
Yeah, but with me, nobody knows.
No, you're wrong there. The 2 most important ones in the whole world know. You and the one who made up all these rules.
For many Americans, the Andersons were the ideal family.
The attempt was to present something real, but I don't think anyone in retrospect could say that represented a real family in that day and age.
Robert Young originated the role on radio in 1949. In 1969, he brought back that compassionate, wise image in the role of Marcus Welby, MD, a kindly family doctor who made house calls in the middle of the night and who, along with his brash young assistant, dispensed simple medicine for simple problems.
What about Margaret Foster, the fat girl?
I think we agree on the diagnosis.
When she went back to school, she started to gain.
Exactly. She's gone off her diet while telling her mother she's sticking to it. What now?
While known best for his television roles, Young actually made more than 50 feature films, starting in 1931.
Well, Larry, let's hope this is the beginning of a great career for you.
But in the words of studio mogul Louis B. Mayer, he had no sex appeal, and so he rarely got the girl.
That was very nice, but I'm busy.
But even as America watched him as the perfect father and doctor, Young's personal life was far from perfect. He battled alcoholism and depression for years, even attempting suicide in 1991. But in the end, it is the fictional legacy that lingers.
And as for the injustice, you just have to have faith that things all balance up and work out all right in the long run.
Judy Muller, ABC News, Hollywood.
The other news today when we come back. The government chooses an affluent...
Comedy
who brought golf to the surface of the moon. Alan Shepard died. We will be joined by a few giants of our own. Gene Cernan will be with us. Jay Barbary, who covered every space mission there has been for NBC News, will join us from Florida tonight. We'll talk about what Alan Shepard meant for his time and generations to come. Also, 4 members of the White House press corps will be with us tonight for a roundtable of sorts.
People to walk on the moon. Former space mate Senator John Glenn says Shepard was as all-American as they come.
No one was more dedicated to this country and to the astronaut program, to flying, to the Navy, to being a dedicated patriot in this country. No one is going to exceed Al Shepard in that regard.
10 years after his first flight, Shepard shot back into space, becoming the only one to ever hit a golf ball on the moon. And one of our beloved TV dads is gone. Actor Robert Young died at his home outside Los
Angeles. To forgive whatever there might have been to forgive and not to forget. Last night, for only the 6th time in 30 years since he left the Yankees, Jim Bouton sat in the stands at Yankee Stadium. He watched pitcher David Cone beat Detroit 5-1. I like to watch Cone pitch, Bouton told me. Makes me think about how I'm going to pitch to Tommy Davis on Saturday. That's right. Michael Bouton's letter moved even George Steinbrenner and the Yankees. Saturday is Old Timers Day at Yankee Stadium, and Jim Bouton is invited. This reminder, we're here twice nightly on The Big Show at 8 p.m. and again at 11 for the White House in Gata Davida. The News with Brian Williams is next. For all of us who prepared this program for you, I'm Keith Olbermann. We thank you. We bid you good night.
For cable news that's more than just headlines, turn to MSNBC. On cable and the internet, MSNBC News.
One of the bravest and finest is gone. A giant among Americans, a hero for generations. Alan Shepard, first American in space. An explosive life has ended quietly in California. The view from the inside as trouble inches closer and closer to the Clinton White House in the form of what is now a deluge of subpoenas. Tonight, our discussion with members of the White House press corps. And Katie Couric's discussion with the man who lost his son in the accident that took Diana's life. Could Mohammed Al-Fayed stand to lose even more now?
From NBC News, this is the news with Brian Williams.
And good Wednesday evening to you. A lot to tell you about tonight. A major loss in Hollywood as well to report. The latest before the grand jury in Washington. The desolation that is Midtown Manhattan these days, where disaster has given way to a pedestrian mall of sorts. And our first look at the Thursday morning newspaper headlines around the country this Wednesday night. First tonight, one of the giants of recent American history is gone. Word arrived today that Alan Shepard had died in his sleep in a hospital in California. He was a genuine American hero. For Americans of a certain age who were alive then, the liftoff of Freedom 7 was a defining moment. For others of a certain age who may not understand quite why Alan Shepard was a hero, how many people do you know who would ask to be strapped to the top of a rocket with a measurable chance of being blown apart? As it turns out, it wasn't. He went up, stayed a few minutes, came back down safely. The space race was then on. America had some catching up to do. It did, and it won. It wouldn't have happened without Alan Shepard, nor would there be 2 golf balls sitting on the surface of the moon tonight without Alan Shepard. Tonight, Robert Hager starts us off with a look back.
The Soviet Union celebrated beating America to space with the unmanned satellite Sputnik, then sending cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into orbit in 1961. 23 days later, as astronaut Alan Shepard waited on the launch pad, America waited with him. NBC correspondent Jay Barbary remembers.
People here literally fell to their knees and prayed as this man took off. They stopped wherever they were.
Reading loud and clear.
It was just a 15-minute flight and only 5 minutes technically in space as he shot 300 miles out into the Atlantic. But as a helicopter plucked him from his ocean landing, along with his space capsule Freedom 7, he'd done it. At age 37, the first American in space. President Kennedy pinned a medal on him. 500,000 cheered as he paraded down
before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Shepard would himself reach the moon in 1971 and brought us this wonderful moment.
Hands, but I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here. Miles and miles and miles.
The world has now lost Alan Shepard, but we still have the capsule he first rode to space that day, the Freedom 7. The Smithsonian took it out of storage today, brought it here to its Air and Space Museum in Washington to put on public display. Small, primitive by today's high-tech space standards. But the 5 minutes Shepard spent aboard it in space restored our national sense of confidence. Later, Shepard invested in business, became a millionaire.
And when he played hard. He had a lot of fun. He was a big practical joker. But when he was on the job, business was first. And he took care of business.
Just 5 months ago, now 74 years old, he spoke of the thrill of looking back at Earth from space.
That was an overwhelming feeling, and seeing the beauty of the planet on the one hand, but the fragility of it on the other.
Today, a grateful nation looks back.
Alan Shepard truly had the right stuff.
The U.S. now leads the world in space. It all started with that first flight. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
Our next guest here this evening knew Alan Shepard well. Gene Cernan flew on 3 separate space missions. He was second American to walk in space as the pilot on Gemini 9. He first went to the moon on Apollo 10, then as commander of Apollo 17. He holds the distinction to this day of being the last man to leave his footprints on the surface of the moon. He's with us tonight from Houston. And Gene, how do we describe Alan Shepard in an era where the words hero and courage have been thrown around way too often?
Well, you know, celebrity status, hero status has taken on a new meaning. I think, you know, Al earned that status the hard way. I think, as we just heard, he started us back on a road to preeminence, not just in space, but internationally.
To sit on top of that thing, it's not an overstatement to say there really were no guarantees about what was going to happen.
Well, you're going back... I wasn't even in the space program, man. I was one of those young naval aviators on the West Coast, just like everybody else. Hero worship. I couldn't believe this guy was going to get on top of that big firecracker, because all we'd seen was rockets blow up and spin out, one thing or another. But you know, I was determined. As we heard a minute ago, when he worked hard. When he played hard. And I can't think of anybody better to have put on that first redstone than Al Shepard.
His golf shot on the moon, which we were reminded right before we went on the air, he actually took a mulligan, first mulligan on the moon as well, was, as Bob Hager pointed out, criticized by the old purists. But for so many people, this one simple act of smuggling his club and 2 golf balls in his suit all the way to the moon humanized a space program that had, you know, introduced fascinating language like Capcom and things like that to the American culture.
Brian, the technology was way out. Nobody really understood it, and Al had a way. He loved the game of golf, and he had a way of relating his phenomenal experience of having gone to the moon, particularly after all those years of waiting since that first flight, and allowed a lot of people to identify with Al Shepard as a human being, and with the fascination of space flight as well. There's one interesting thing. Nobody really knows, except Al, whether that golf ball went miles and miles and miles, and I always questioned him on that, but he never gave in.
Well, the first hole, of course, in moon terms is a long distance away.
Yeah.
Is there any comparison, when you look back in history, Yuri Gagarin and Alan Shepard, 2 entirely different characters as you read more about what's finally coming out about Gagarin, but both had shared this gene that you all share, the kind of pilot mentality, the bravery that allowed you all to get strapped into these. Gemini wasn't much bigger than Mercury, and you did that.
Not much. I've always contended you have to have a little arrogance to be a test pilot to start with, and of course that's something we all shared with Al. And Al was the ultimate test pilot. Where nothing, I don't want to take anything away from Gagarin, but he was pretty much of a passenger. He was the ideal Soviet at that time to put aboard that spacecraft. Where Al was out there to find out whether we could do anything in space, not just go and make headlines, but really do something worthwhile. And he did. He truly opened the door. And the ironic fact is that I think history has already shown that had we had a little bit more aggressiveness at the time and not been so surprised by the Soviets, Alan could have been not just the first American in space, but the first human in space.
Well, you compared him today to Magellan on the radio, and it was appropriate to hear, and modesty prevents you from saying this, but it took same courage to strap into a Gemini as it did to a Mercury. Gene Cernan,
well,
great to have you back on the broadcast. Sorry this occasion brought us together.
Well, thank you, Brian. A pleasure being here.
Thank you, sir. Where word arrived today that yet another American icon from a different line of work entirely has passed away as well. Robert Young, best known for his roles on Father Knows Best, and Marcus Welby, MD, died yesterday at his home outside Los Angeles. Young's doctor said the 91-year-old actor's death was age-related. Young appeared in numerous films in the 1930s and 40s, but will best be remembered for his television career. In the 50s, he played Jim Anderson, the father who really did know best, the archetype domestic 50s dad. He returned to television in the 70s as Marcus Welby, America's favorite doctor. Robert Young, who overcame battles during his life with alcohol and with depression, dead tonight at the age of 91. A lot more to tell you about as we continue this Wednesday evening our discussion with elements of the White House press corps. That would mean the actual reporters covering the biggest story in the Clinton presidency thus far. And later on, the American television industrial complex really reached its apex the minute Neil Armstrong put his foot down on another land outside our own.
Well, yeah, and you know, Alan Shepard did too, and played a little golf on the moon 10 years after his initial flight in, I think, February of 1961. He landed on the moon. I don't think we pay enough attention to the things that this country did during that era, the things that we were capable of, the things that were articulated by a president that came to fruition. We tend now to look at it as ancient history, but boy, this was big stuff. This was really big stuff when it occurred.
And Jay Barbary, there were some purists in NASA, we discussed at the top of the broadcast with Gene Cernan, who didn't like the golf shot or the subsequent mulligan on the moon. They thought it was demeaning, but for those like you who knew Alan Shepard, to have not hit a golf ball on the moon would have been way out of character, correct?
That's correct, but he would not have done it unless he did have the time, because he was the most dedicated. He was fun-loving, but as I said, dedicated, and he was a tough guy, but yet Alan Shepard was loving. And you know, Brian, I'd like to think tonight, I know that he's seeing John Glenn getting ready to go up again, and I know that Alan would have liked to have flown again, and I would like to think tonight that Alan Shepard is flying higher than any of them.
Jay Barbary, we're going to end on that note. Mike Barnacle, thank you both, gentlemen, for your thoughts on an American hero lost to this country today. That is our broadcast for this Wednesday night. Coming up next on MSNBC, the broadcast time and again reaches back into the NBC News archives and takes a look at the world of dinosaurs, from movies like Jurassic Park and Godzilla of late to theories about the dinosaurs' extinction.
Welcome to the Best of the Cryo Report. They were once considered the Republican Party's rising...
It will reform the way people pay their taxes. He also warned against a tax cut right now. Miami Herald front page, the big cloning story. 3 generations of mice have been cloned, duplicating for the first time the feet that produced Dolly the sheep, and showing as a practical matter that cloning could become routine. The research, of course, was risky. It's being followed closely by the medical community. They say their method will be a breakthrough for animal breeding and basic scientific research and nothing more. Atlanta Constitution, a big story down there. A 2-year-old girl who contracted E. coli from a kiddie pool at the Whitewater Park in Marietta, Georgia, died today. The only child in U.S. history to die from E. coli transmitted from a chlorinated pool, according to health officials at the Centers for Disease Control. And USA Today front page, the rumors that have taken over Chicago that Tim Floyd, the coach of Iowa State, is about to become the Chicago Bulls' next head coach. Michael Jordan said he doesn't want to play for him. He calls him Pink Floyd. Dennis Rodman has criticized him, which for most people would become an endorsement, but it looks like they're breaking up the Chicago Bulls, in effect bringing in a new coach, and the players of old will not be around to play for him. When we come back, 2 men with the last word on one of the great men in aviation history in the United States.
Extinct for millions of years, they live on in the imaginations of children of all ages. The amazing world of dinosaurs on Time and Again, next on MSNBC.
While the nation is gripped in the middle of a heat wave, why some people are getting ripped off just trying to get cooled off. An NBC News hidden camera investigation.
Tomorrow on MSNBC.
Imagine 6 out of 10 working Americans being locked out and stopped from joining a credit union. No more low-rate credit union loans to buy a home. No more consumer loans to buy a car. No student loans to help send a child to college. That's what the big banks and their Washington lobbyists want Congress to do. Lock tens of millions of Americans out of credit unions forever. But you can stop them. Call your senators today. Tell them to support H.R. 1151 and protect America's credit unions.
As a lad growing up in the outback, golf legend Nigel Bridges showed little aptitude for sports. He wasn't very good at rugby or cricket, or so it seemed, at golf. But he tried and he tried and he tried and he tried and he tried. Until he got it right. You'll find the same dedication and commitment to perfection at Outback Steakhouse, where a great steak dinner is always just a short drive away. Outback Steakhouse, no rules, just right.
Good shot! Why does Arm & Hammer Dental Care clean away plaque better than regular toothpaste? New tests prove it. Like this golf ball, your teeth are filled with microscopic crevices. Arm & Hammer gets in these crevices to clean plaque away better. Feels like a dentist cleaning every time you brush.
This is the brain of a person looking at a pie chart. This is the same brain looking at a pie chart on Hammermill paper. Get bright colors with Hammermill Jet Print, the paper that works.
Golf Digest presents 50 ways to lower your score.
To get greater distance, turn your right foot out. For a better backswing, don't slide. Turn your hips instead.
Now, lower your score, drive longer, hit straighter, and play your best golf ever with the 50 new stroke-saving tips in every Golf Digest. Call now for your risk-free trial issue. If you like it, get 11 more issues, 12 in all, for just $19.97. Plus, get this stroke-saving video free.
Call 800-952-2626.
As many will do at 10 and 11 o'clock across the country, we led tonight's broadcast with the death of Alan Shepard. We dedicated our last word to it tonight. For most Americans of a certain age, Alan Shepard was a true hero. Our next two guests have their own memories of him. Mike Barnacle, veteran columnist for the Boston Globe, and Jay Barbrie, veteran NBC News correspondent who knew Alan Shepard for almost 40 years, as he's known them all, having covered every space mission in U.S. history. He is with us tonight from Cape Canaveral. And Jay, these guys walked around that NASA campus with a certain amount of swagger, and it was deserved because they were about to do something that no one else could. How do you explain to a television watching audience the kind of courage it took to sit on top of that Redstone rocket?
Well, it took what we would call a true American hero, Brian, because it happened in a day when it wasn't shameful to be patriotic. And these guys were patriotic. There was a gap to catch up with the Russians, and they were out to do it. And Alan Shepard was the leader of the pack. He was selected to be first to go into space because, quote, the people who selected him said he was the most intelligent, the most dedicated.
And Mike Barnacle, what did the country lose when they lost Alan Shepard?
You know, Brian, I was struck watching part of the interview that Katie had with Dodi Fayed's father, in that we live in an age now where celebrity is so worshipped that Princess Diana, who was a very nice woman who wore clothes very well and had a very bad marriage, has been deified in death. And yet today, a truly epic event when Alan Shepard soared off into the sky. He was a true hero. I can recall it as if it were yesterday. I can recall school coming to a stop. I can recall people with smiles on their faces because Yuri Gagarin and Sputnik and Francis Gary Powers and the U-2 were all in the past as soon as Alan Shepard soared into the stratosphere. And I think his life meant more in terms of our culture and our country than, and this is not to denigrate Princess Diana, than Princess Diana's life did.
And Jay, there was Gagarin, and then the United States had to stand by and watch a monkey go into space, and then we learned just today, based on just released files from President Kennedy's secretary, the president really thought long and hard about television coverage of Alan Shepard's flight in case something went wrong. It wasn't assumed at all that this would go off flawlessly, was it?
Not at all, Brian. In fact, that's very true. Alan Shepard himself had to convince President Kennedy that it was safe enough. He used the term, it was as if he was taking an airline flight from New York to Los Angeles. They had proven the Mercury Redstone rocket. He had to convince him that because after Gagarin went into orbit, a lot of his advisors were saying, shut the store down. There's no reason to go. Shepard convinced him we should. He made the flight, a flawless flight, and on the basis of that, John F. Kennedy made the commitment to go to the moon in Apollo before the decade was out.
And Jay, how far up, it bears repeating, how far up he went and how long he was up?
Well, he was only up there for 16 minutes. He went 116 miles high and 300 miles downrange. He landed right off of the Grand Bahama Island. It was called a suborbital flight. He only achieved 5 minutes of weightlessness and 5,000 miles per hour. But the fact was that he had gone into space. He could have done it before Gagarin if von Braun had not insisted on having another engineering flight. That's one thing that Alan Shepard never gave the fame rocket scientist Werner von Braun for. That was insisting on another rocket flight because he could have been the first person in space.
And Mike Barnacle, it's been said that the military-industrial complex really reached its apex the minute Neil Armstrong put his foot down on another land outside our own.
Well, yeah, and you know, Alan Shepard did too, and played a little golf on the moon 10 years after his initial flight in, I think, February of 1961. He landed on the moon. I don't think we pay enough attention to the things that this country did during that era, the things that we were capable of, the things that were articulated by a president that came to fruition. We tend now to look at it as ancient history, but boy, this was big stuff. This was really big stuff when it occurred.
And Jay Barbary, there were some purists in NASA, we discussed at the top of the broadcast with Gene Cernan, who didn't like the golf shot or the subsequent mulligan on the moon. They thought it was demeaning, but for those like you who knew Alan Shepard, to have not hit a golf ball on the moon would have been way out of character, correct?
That's correct, but he would not have done it unless he did have the time, because he was the most dedicated. He was fun-loving, but as I said, dedicated, and he was a tough guy, but yet Alan Shepard was loving. And you know, Brian, I'd like to think tonight, I know that seeing John Glenn getting ready to go up again, and I know that Alan would have liked to flown again, and I would like to think tonight that Alan Shepard is flying higher than any of them.
Jay Barbary, we're going to end on that note. Mike Barnacle, thank you both, gentlemen, for your thoughts on an American hero lost to this country today. That is our broadcast for this Wednesday night. Coming up next on MSNBC, the broadcast time and again reaches back into the NBC News archives and takes a look at the world of dinosaurs, from movies like Jurassic Park and Godzilla of late to theories about the dinosaurs' extinction 65 million years ago, and some archaeological discoveries of note as well. Again, all of it from the archives as covered over the years by NBC News. We hope to see you right back here at this same time tomorrow night. I'm Brian Williams. For all of us here, good night, everybody.
On the best for now and for fall. Macy's preseason sale going on now.
This is Imagine TV.
You are late for the sale. My dog ate my Mercury.
There's no excuse not to check out a $379 lease for 33 months on Mercury Mountaineer. Now even more comfortable with no charge leather. See your Lincoln Mercury dealer now for a $379 lease on a loaded Mountaineer that'll satisfy your appetite for extras.
Till next time, imagine yourself in a Mercury.
Check it out! Give me
Coffee Culotta from Dunkin' Donuts. Nothing's more beautiful on a hot day.
News Channel 4, the only place you'll find Doppler 4000.
Good morning. Ken Starr's grand jury is getting closer to the president. The man who's the head of President Clinton's security detail is finally expected to testify about what he knows of the president's alleged relationship with Monica Lewinsky today, Thursday, July 23rd, 1998.
from NBC News, this is Today with Katie Couric and Matt Lauer. Live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
And good morning. Welcome to Today on this Thursday morning. I'm Matt Lauer.
And I'm Katie Couric. There was a song from a musical called Mr. President that said, "The Secret Service makes me nervous." I wonder if the White House is feeling that way this morning.
At least humming the tune, probably. Larry Cockle's called the so-called body man, and people have been wondering what he knows. Ken Starr may find out today.
Finally.
That's
maybe.
Right. Yeah. We're going to have more on that at the news desk in a few minutes. Then we'll remember a couple of American legends. Astronaut Alan Shepard, the first American in space, died yesterday at the age of 74. His 15-minute flight back in 1961 gave this country a hero to cheer for. We'll remember his life and his career with two former astronauts, including Scott Carpenter, one of the other original Magnificent Seven.
Meanwhile, Matt, another famous figure has died, a father figure to scores of baby boomers who grew up watching Jim Anderson, insurance salesman, along with his wife Margaret and their children Princess Bud and Kitten. This morning we'll remember Robert Young as well, who died of respiratory failure at the age of 91 when we speak with Billy Gray, who played his son on the beloved series.
Steven Spielberg opens a new movie tomorrow. It is one of the most anticipated films of the summer, called Saving Private Ryan. My opinion only, the most intense war movie I've ever seen. We'll talk to the director about that this morning.
I'm nervous to go see it.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing.
And speaking of Saving Private Ryan, on to the real military. The military's policy on adultery and the punishment meted out is being studied by Secretary of Defense William Cohen. Many people think there needs to be more uniformity and equity in the system. We'll get into that issue in our second half hour.
Plus, the announcement of the primetime Emmy